Good afternoon, and welcome to day 3 of Learning Forward's Revised Standards for Professional Learning Release Week. My name is Melinda George, and I am the Chief Policy Officer at Learning Forward, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you here today. As you'll see on the next slide, and why we talk about this as a week-long event, is that it truly is, with many opportunities to learn about and engage with the standards for professional learning. Today, we are focused on the intersection between standards and policy. Tomorrow, we will dig deeper into the roles at all levels of educational systems that standards support: district office leader, principal, instructional coach, and external partners. And on Friday, we will dive deeply into the research base for the standards, a topic that I know is central to the work of all educational systems and policymakers. We encourage you to join us for as many of these live sessions as possible, and also know that they are being recorded. So you also have the option of watching them at your own convenience. If you haven't yet, and you can take a look at the next slide, I hope you'll take time to go and visit the standards.learningforward.org to see the standards, as well as the many resources that Learning Forward has created to help you understand and apply the standards in your context. The website has many links to resources and helps to make connections for the standards across all educational settings. We know that in policy conversations, the research base behind the new standards is critical. So today I want to draw your attention to a comprehensive overview paper that's now on our website on the research tab. Learning Forward enlisted an amazing research working group throughout the standards revision process. And I am so pleased that a member of that group, Maria Heiler, is part of our panel today. Paul Fleming, my colleague at Learning Forward, is also going to touch briefly on some of the findings of the work. But I encourage each of you to mark your calendars for this coming Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, when we will host a webinar diving deeply into the research. Please join us. About 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to have a really wonderful conversation with a lead staff person from the U.S. House of Representatives. And he and I were talking about the standards and the wonderful graphic that shows how all of the standards work together to improve systems for professional development to support educators and improve learning. And as we were talking, it was as though there was an aha moment when he said, so if a state or a school district adopts the standards at the system level, then we can know that the policies and investments in that system will be strong because the professional learning being offered aligns to the standards. Yes, exactly. It was very exciting, and it was a great reminder to me as I prepared for this briefing today of how important it is that that systems perspective is captured and that we think about it in terms of policy and investments. So it's with that frame in mind that we come together today for this special policy briefing, where we will explore the impact that standards can have at the state and regional levels, and how systems that align their professional learning to the standards can ensure that their policies are sound, their investments are meaningful, and most importantly, that they are improving educator practice that in turn improves student outcomes. So today we're going to hear from my colleague, Paul Fleming. Paul's the Senior Vice President for Standards, States, and Equity at Learning Forward, and he's a member of the Learning Forward Standards team. And Paul is going to provide an overview of the standards to help orient our discussion. We're then going to have a panel of experts who are going to help us make those connections between standards adoption and policies, the research behind making these decisions, and the ways in which we can share information and learning about the standards. And then finally, we're going to engage in a question and answer of which we want all of you to be a part. We have Learning Forward staff members across all of the different platforms who would love to get your questions and make sure that I get your questions so that we can get those questions to the panelists. I know that sounds like a lot of leaps, but it's actually very seamless. So please don't hesitate to put your questions into the chat box. And as we get started, I will note that this live stream is available through all those different channels I just mentioned. So you could be watching this on a page from Learning Forward's website, through our YouTube channel, from Twitter, or from Facebook. So you can use the chat box in any of those places to reach out to the panel. And we are recording the entire week's events. So if you need to come back or want to see it again, you're welcome to join in to the recordings. So now I'm happy to introduce Paul Fleming. Paul, as I mentioned, is a Senior Vice President for Standards, States, and Equity, and a member of our staff standards team. I first got to know Paul when he was the Assistant Commissioner for Teachers and Leaders Division at the Tennessee Department of Education. And in Tennessee, he was responsible for the design, implementation, evaluation, and support, this is a mouthful, Paul, of impactful policies, practices, and programs related to teacher and leader preparation, institutions, licensure, evaluation, and development, and educator talent. I don't know how you did it all. So you can see why he is the perfect person to join us for this webinar focused on how standards and policy move educator practice. So Paul's going to kick us off with a brief overview of the revised standards and some of the resources that are available. So Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Melinda, and great to be with all of you today. And as Melinda mentioned, really dive deeply into how the standards can inform both policy and practice. And also, as Melinda mentioned, as you see here on our new standards, affectionately called the standards pie graphic, the opportunity to move systems and impact both policy and practice through the implementation of the 11 standards that form our newly revised standards for professional learning. Quick note about this design, as you see in the pie, that all the standards do touch each other, and that is intentional. So as we know that the standards must be used in concert with each other, and it's important that they form a cohesive whole for educators and policymakers at all levels as well. And so that's why this design is intentional for individual 11 standards, all connected, and also recognizing that individuals at different levels have different entry points into our standards. So as you'll see in the next few slides, we have 3 frames that form the framework for the standards for professional learning, starting with the rigorous content for each learner. And this is really the what, right, for professional learning. When we think about the equity practices that are needed and the equity policies and practices that are needed across all levels, all of the important strategies and resources with curriculum assessment and instruction, and then finally also with professional expertise and how important that is of forming these trifecta of standards in this rigorous content frame. This is followed by the transformational process frame, which you'll see on the next slide. And this is a key piece as well for transforming both policy and practice at the system level, recognizing that this is the how of professional learning, and that these standards that are clumped and grouped together form an essential part of the transformational processes necessary for, again, educators and systems to move forward in an equitable fashion. And then finally, our third frame are the conditions for success, which form the foundation and the critical pieces around the equity foundations, around the leadership piece, the resources, and also the extremely impactful culture of collaborative inquiry that drive the conditions necessary for, again, individuals at all roles and all levels and systems to have positive outcomes for all students and staff as well. So I think what's also powerful to point out are the foundations that undergird the standards. And we have numerous foundations here on the next 2 slides, but I wanted to point out the second one about the importance of a professional learning system driving high quality professional learning. We know that systems that operate without the cohesive support of innovative policies often stall. And that's why it's so important that both policy and practice work together to drive practice. And to give you an example on the next slide, you'll see this third bullet about policy guiding practice. And as Melinda mentioned, when I was Assistant Commissioner in Tennessee, we took the standards for professional learning and intentionally embedded them into the state leadership standards and also the principal evaluation rubric. So all 1,800 principals to this day in Tennessee over the last 8 years have to be aware and think about deep implementation of the standards for professional learning through both the state leadership standards and also through practice and evaluation. And this was intentional, this was by design, and I believe an effective example of how state policy can both guide and inform practice, and then how practice can in turn guide and inform state level policy and national policy around professional learning as well. So also wanted to just briefly touch on the research. You'll hear more about this both today in the panel and also on Friday, as Melinda mentioned, with our research session that is happening then. But the powerful piece is we know these standards, like the ones that have come before in 2011 and previously, are grounded in evidence from the use of these past standards and also insights from the field. And also our recent meta-analysis from AIR, which found, if you look at the next slide, a pretty impactful finding that through these 48 studies that were examined through 52 professional learning programs, that the learning forward standards are associated with improved teacher instruction and student achievement outcomes. And we know this evidence base is really important for both informing policy and practice as well. So the other piece we want to highlight about in the overview is the intentional inclusion of equity, both in each STEM statement of each of the 11 standards, and also through each frame. As you see, there are 3 equity standards. We don't have time to go into them today, but know that this was an intentional design so that equity is embedded both throughout the standards, just like we know equity needs to be embedded not as a standalone program, but in the DNA of every school, system, district level, and state level policy, and how important that is for equity to be reached at those levels and to be inclusive and not a standalone practice. And we're proud of that. And as I mentioned, that shows up in the common STEM for each standard. And each standard follows both the 3 constructs that follow that common STEM, and that is by design. And so for each standard, those obviously are different. And then as you see on the right, the linkages to how each standard is linked to the others in our standards pie to show that they work in concert with each other, as well as the selected research at the end of each standard to show and to go deeper about the impact of each standard and the actions that are found within. And so that is by design. Moving just finally to the tools, we are proud that we're releasing 7 action guides at different levels, spanning from classroom teacher all the way to state commissioner and beyond with external partner. These action guides that, as you see here as an example, for state commissioner, show the key responsibilities and roles that those in that role can take for deep implementation of the standards, as well as some guiding questions that drive what are the first steps that these individuals in these roles can take that fit their context. Because we know, as you'll hear today, one of the panelists from Missouri, Paul Catnik, has a very different context than, let's say, for example, me in Tennessee and other states. And so these action guides are designed to really fit the need there as well across. Finally, I want to point out, as Melinda pointed with the standards page and the website, more of the tools, and one we're really excited about under the policy tools section that you can find for free is the standards adoption guide that lists explicit strategies for how states can adopt, or in some cases need to re-adopt the standards now that they are coming out in this revived fashion, and also key strategies and action steps for districts and school level leaders to embed the standards more deeply into policy and practice. And so we're excited to highlight that as a policy tool that's available for state leaders, district leaders, and school leaders as well. So we know this is a very quick overview, but hope that this is an opportunity to think and to delve more deeply into the standards, both today, this week, and going forward through the website. And with that, I will turn it back to Melinda for the introduction of our panel. So thank you, Melinda.
Awesome. Paul, thank you so much. It's so helpful to have that overview so that as we start talking about how the standards can be used with policy, we can envision what the standards include. And I will say I learn something every time a member of the standards team shares an overview. So that was really helpful for me too. So thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce our incredible panel. We are going to start with Maria Heiler. Maria is the director for the Washington, D.C. office and senior researcher for the Learning Policy Institute. And she's been deeply involved in the standards development as a member of that highly acclaimed research working group that I was mentioning a few minutes ago. Maria also directs the Educator Preparation Laboratory, or EdPrep Lab, which is a center on teacher and leader preparation for deeper learning and equity, which is working to transform educator preparation through the alignment of research, practice, and policy. So she's the perfect person for this panel. As a senior researcher with deep policy knowledge, Maria is going to kick off our panel discussion and help with some policy recommendations for high quality professional learning. So Maria, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Melinda. Hello, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the research-based policies that LPI has recommended to support effective professional development. First, I want to share that the recommendations come out of a 2017 study we conducted on effective professional learning opportunities. We did an extensive review of the literature and found 35 methodologically rigorous studies that demonstrate a positive link between teacher professional learning and student learning outcomes. Our purpose in doing so was to identify and describe common features of effective professional development programs building on a significant existing literature in this area. And since that time, others have built upon the study's findings, including the extensive research done by Learning Forward through their standards revision process. So out of that report, it challenges the ideas of traditional professional development models that we are seeing less and less of, I'm happy to say, because of this type of research and people actually attending to Learning Forward standards. So exciting to see this paradigm change. And what we found was that programs that make a difference for students and their teachers tend to follow a different model, which we conceptualize as being defined by the 7 features listed here. Next slide. I'm just gonna ask you to take time to read the report that goes into details about all the components, and they're much aligned with the Learning Forward standards. But I wanted to focus on, as Melinda said, what are the conditions for creating effective professional development, and in particular, what policies support the types of professional learning we know matter for teachers and students. What are some of the areas of focus for policymakers to help ensure teachers have access to high quality professional learning? Policies could adopt standards for professional development to guide the design, evaluation, and funding for professional learning provided to educators, such as the Learning Forward standards. And that's, I think, about 40 states have adopted the Learning Forward standards as their state professional learning standards. So that's very encouraging. Policymakers and administrators could evaluate and redesign the use of time and school schedules to increase opportunities for professional learning and collaboration, including participation in professional learning communities, peer coaching, and observations across classrooms and collaborative planning. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that in just a minute. States, districts, and schools could regularly conduct needs assessments using data from staff surveys to identify areas of professional learning most needed and desired by educators. And state and district administrators could identify and develop expert teachers as mentors and coaches to support learning in their particular areas of expertise for other educators. States and districts can also integrate professional learning into ESSA school improvement initiatives, such as efforts to implement new learning standards, use student data to inform instruction, improve student literacy, increase student access to advanced coursework, and create a positive and inclusive learning environment. One example, Title IIA of ESSA, the Supporting Effective Instruction Program, provides grants to states and school districts to fund programs and activities that helps teachers, school leaders, and administrators better serve their students, including professional development. Policymakers could work to ensure that the Supporting Effective Instruction program is adequately funded so that states and districts have the resources necessary to implement research-based professional development. States and districts can provide technology-facilitated opportunities for professional learning and coaching using funding available under Titles 2 and 4 of ESSA to address the needs of rural communities and provide opportunities for intra-district and intra-school collaboration. And as we saw during the pandemic, it's even more so necessary to support this technology-facilitated opportunities. We know that it's been effective, and it's great to see that we were able to use those types of technologies to support teachers during the pandemic, and we should continue to do so. Policymakers can provide flexible funding and continuing education units for learning opportunities that include the elements identified in our research report and not just traditional workshops. And I referenced before COVID and the pandemic, and I wanted to take a minute to share some learnings that we've had over the last couple of years about what really made a difference in terms of continuing to supporting teachers to continue to teach in virtual, hybrid, and in-person configurations throughout the pandemic. Flexible schedules. This refers to literal schedules that are flexible in new configurations. With hybrid and online learning, teachers often had more time to connect and collaborate because of the mix of synchronous and asynchronous learning taking place in schools. So the question is, how can we continue to develop schedules that allow for that continued collaboration? We shouldn't just go back to school as usual. Flexible schedules also refers to teachers who have expertise that might have flexible roles to teach part-time and provide mentoring and support part-time. This way, the best teachers can continue to support student and teacher learning. It is well known that U.S. teachers have the least amount of time for collaboration compared to international high-performing school systems. Excuse me. Thus, it is not surprising that U.S. teachers are less likely than their international counterparts to report that they ever observe other teachers' classes and provide feedback, ever teach as a team, or ever take part in collaborative professional learning. Yet collaboration time is ranked by teachers as among the most important variables for their learning and retention in the profession. And research finds that those who work in collegial work settings grow more rapidly in effectiveness. In many districts during the pandemic, this changed overnight with distance learning, with more teaming and collaboration time organized among teachers than ever before. This is an opportunity to continue to do things differently and better. As we consider innovative teaching and learning schedules, securing the time for U.S. teachers, the 8 hours on average that our international colleagues experience, should become part of the new normal. One potential source of funding for this work is the Education, Innovation, and Research, the EIR program of ESSA. Policymakers could work to increase EIR's funding and focus some of the program on initiatives that would help schools adapt their schedules to increase opportunities for professional learning and collaboration. Similarly, the EIR program could support teacher leadership through teacher-led professional development and support for educators to earn advanced credentials such as a national board certification. Finally, as districts figure out how to structure intense, effective professional learning and recognize those educators who can lead the way for others, micro-credentialing may become increasingly important. Micro-credentials recognize the specific areas of skills teachers have acquired based on demonstrated performance and not seat time. These may range from areas such as distance learning or competencies in designing performance-based assessments to skills for supporting social and emotional learning and trauma-informed practice to more general skills of mentoring. Some states are developing systems of micro-credentialing for both pre- and in-service educators. Digital Promise offers a wide range of micro-credentials for teachers and school leaders. Districts may want to use micro-credentialing as a means to identify mentors and professional development leaders so that they can more quickly develop expertise of colleagues in particular areas. The National Education Association has launched its micro-credentialing system and platform as part of the Center for Great Public Schools. NEA is partnering with Digital Promise to make more than 150 micro-credentials that offer on-demand professional learning freely available to its members. And because it's on demand, NEA encourages teachers to work with their affiliate unions to create professional learning communities whose members complete the credentials together to experience that collaboration of learning. Very importantly, Digital Promise has also published guidance for policymakers around the use of micro-credentials, as we know that there's variation in the quality of those still, and we need guidelines for micro-credentials just as we do other sorts of professional learning. And then one final thought I'd like to leave you with: policies to support educator professional learning should be part of a comprehensive plan for teaching and learning, and should not be isolated or siloed from the ways in which states and districts think about teacher preparation, induction, learning, and evaluation. They should all work together in service of preparing and supporting the educators our students need and deserve. The 2 reports I discussed are available online at learningpolicyinstitute.org, and I'd be happy to answer any questions and be a resource. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it back to Melinda.
Wonderful. Maria, thank you so much. I'll start by thanking you for your presentation and also for your service on the research working group. I hope everybody was able to appreciate both the policy recommendations, which are so concrete around policy, but also the really tangible ways that you connected it to the work that's happening in schools and districts. So thank you so much for that. I'm now going to turn it over to Paul Catnik, and I will tell you all, oh good, we can see you, Paul. Can you hear us? So Paul is having some technical difficulties. He can not see or hear us, but we can hear him hopefully. So this is a true warrior in wanting to represent for Learning Forward today. So thank you for that. Paul is the Deputy Commissioner for the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And he served at the Department of Education for over 10 years, coordinating the state model education evaluation system, revising teacher and leader preparation programs, developing the state's educator equity plan, and creating the Missouri Leadership Development System, which you will hear about today. Paul has also been deeply involved in the standards development as a member of the Standards Advisory Committee for the past 2 years. And he's one of my favorite advocates, understanding the importance of collecting, compiling, and sharing impact data. So Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and join in this afternoon. I've been here with the state agency for a lot of years, over 15, and in all that time, Missouri has been a longtime Learning Forward affiliate. We've known here, and we really believe here, that professional learning is vital to improving teacher practice as well as leader practice. But why does being an affiliate matter? Well, it's because what Learning Forward provides for us, we accept and we use. We don't take time to devise our own standards. We use the ones that they do, and so revised standards like the ones coming out this week matter to us a lot. And I just want to take a moment this afternoon to explain to you how that happens. We use them as a state agency. We encourage our school districts to use them. And we also, all the training we provide through our regional professional development centers, they use them as well. From the way we look at it as a state agency, we have 3 primary areas of responsibility when promoting high quality professional learning throughout the state. First, there's policy. Second, there's funding. And third, these 2 combine to establish expectations. We use the standards to then create our professional learning guidelines. This is a 150-page document that provides guidelines around what professional learning at a high quality actually looks like. We don't rewrite the standards. We don't invent them ourselves. We use the good work of Learning Forward to guide what we put in our guidelines. And what's important about putting it in policy is it's not a suggestion. It's not invitational. It's stronger than that. It's best practice that we put out there. Our guidelines have 5 sections. We have a section 1 on mission, mandates, and regulations, a section 2 on roles, responsibilities, and standards. 3 is on professional development committees. The 4th one is on planning, implementation, and evaluation. And then we have a 5th section on resources. In terms of funding, the state of Missouri for over 30 years now has dedicated 1% of funding required out of the state's funding for the district to use on professional learning. Even back in the recession times, schools still honored that 1%. And there's a requirement that they spend 3/4 of the 1% each year on professional learning, or next year's allocations in jeopardy. And the combination of the two, the guidelines and the funding, is what creates the expectations. Most importantly, besides having expectations for our school districts, for our higher education partners, most importantly, though, those expectations for ourselves. We feel as a state agency, we have to lead by example. And there's 2 important areas where we do this: teacher development and leadership development. I've put up here on a slide that you can see some of the data that we collect around our leadership system and on our teacher system. First of all, on the leader system, of course, we track participation rates among our principals. You can see we're well over 1,000 principals that have participated over the last several years. Our most current data now has us at over 1,200. That's important because scale matters. If you're trying to create common language around professional learning, you got to get the common right, and that means you have to do it at scale. But you can also see here that we check in with our principals about, does this stuff apply to what you do every day on the job? Is it relevant to what you do? Are you learning it and using it? And then we ask superintendents the same thing. Do you think this is happening for your principals? You'll notice on that second page there, we track very closely retention rates of our principals. It's a shortage, not only at the teacher level, but at principals level. And it's important for us to know if our professional learning, like the research says, contributes to higher levels of retention. And we've seen it in our program year after year. We outscore the state average by 10 percentage points in terms of retention rates. We gather that same data for our first year teachers, because that's an issue too. We lose too many early career teachers. So you can see we gather data on that. And we also gather data from principals about the change in practice of their teachers when they work with us. We use, as you can see here, pre and post surveys that say, before we even start, how well versed were you in these high research based strategies? And what was it like after you participated? And we even use this data to confirm whether or not work we do around equity in our state, which is incredibly important, whether that's working as well. All of this data is what we do to make sure that we are moving towards what the standards talk about. Standards are these aspirational statements, and the data tells us whether or not we're getting close to that. So it's expectations for high quality professional learning for our LEAs, for our higher ed partners, but most important for us, that's what comes from the standards. Without the standards, we would just have fragmented efforts that may be enjoyable, but there's no way to determine if they're successful because we don't have a clear, articulated expectation of what they're to accomplish. That's what the standards do for us, and that's how we use them here in Missouri.
Thank you so much, Paul. And for all of you viewing on our many platforms, you can see why Paul is one of my favorite advocates. He really understands the importance of that impact data and sharing it. And I love how you use the data to determine your progress toward those standards. So thank you so much, Paul. We're going to now turn to Jessica Kazigan. Jessica wears 2 hats. She is a senior education specialist for the CREC Resource Group in Connecticut, as well as the president of Learning Forward Connecticut. She specializes in elementary instructional strategies, PLC implementation and support, curriculum alignment to Common Core state standards, virtual learning, and professional learning for teacher leaders and district coaches. As president of Learning Forward Connecticut, she works to promote high-quality professional learning and provides support and resources around the new standards. We're so happy you're here. I'm so pleased that she's going to share some of the affiliates' efforts with you all today and help us to understand the critical work that Learning Forward affiliates do in supporting educators. So Jessica, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I want to start off by commenting on something that Maria said. When Maria shared that 40 states adopted the previous standards, Connecticut is one of them. So as you can see here, the Connecticut State Department of Education adopted the previous standards that Maria mentioned, and we took those in 2015, and we started to implement them into our 169 local and regional school districts across the state. Something that Connecticut did right from the get-go is we added an additional standard on cultural competence. So as we're moving into the new standards this year, it's nice to see how equity has been embedded into all of them. The work done by each individual school district has gone down to the level where we have individual district professional development and evaluation committees, known as PDEC committees, where their teams of teachers and district leaders are coming together to create the high quality professional learning that is outlined in the standards. Connecticut also has 6 regional education service centers. One that I work for is called CREC, and we continue to support districts with high quality professional learning that are aligned with the standards. Moving on to the next slide, you heard that Melinda shared that we are a new affiliate. Learning Forward Connecticut started right at the beginning of the pandemic because we heard from district stakeholders that there was a need across the state to bring people back together for a connection around high quality professional learning. Because of that, Learning Forward was created. So while it might seem like a small but mighty affiliate, I would like to add, we went from having 0 members right before the pandemic to having 65 members that represent 29 of our districts across our state. Our 5-year goal is to have all 169 districts represented in Learning Forward Connecticut. When we think about the impact of the standards on Connecticut teachers and students, you can look at the numbers that are part of Learning Forward Connecticut. We have 35% of our members that identify as instructional coaches. This is really important because instructional coaches are right in the schools. They're planning, facilitating, and leading professional learning in districts, which are impacting teacher growth, which is impacting student achievement. The standards for professional learning are directly aligned with that phase of the school to standard connection. We also have another group of teacher leaders, though they're still in the classroom and they're learning about the standards, and they are also driving professional learning at their district level. As teacher leaders that are still in the classroom, they're serving on the PDEC committees, they're engaging in higher education still in college classes, and they're working with districts to support student learning. And then the last chunk of our members define themselves as district leaders. You'll see anything from content supervisors to assistant superintendents to principals to professional learning specialists like myself. Again, this work is really important for people like myself because we design professional learning for teachers across the entire state, and all of our work is aligned with the standards. Looking forward to the next slide, you can see that where we have started and where we are going. So when we started Learning Forward Connecticut during the pandemic, it was really hard to identify where to start and where to go. So what we did is we focused our work on what was happening right in front of us, the time that we were in. And we worked with Joelle and Killian to talk about coaching through a time of change, and we met people where they were. We then applied and received the Dale Air grant. And what we're doing this year is we are aligning all of our programming moving forward into the next school year, right with the new standards. All of our events and resources will build the capacity of all of our members, our district leaders, our instructional coaches, our teacher leaders on how to use standards to increase their capacity around good, high quality professional learning. Looking forward to future work. Next slide, please. You can see that Learning Forward, when we adopted the standards in 2015, are now Learning Forward Connecticut is on the front edge. We want to be an advocate to revise the Connecticut learning standards for next generation of teachers, that all of our high quality professional learning is aligned with the new standards, and that we want to educate as many stakeholders as we can around these revised professional learning standards.
Awesome, Jessica. Thank you. For those of you that didn't know about Learning Forward affiliates before Jessica shared all of that information with us, I hope you will see how critical they are to Learning Forward, to getting the word out about our standards, and to really impacting professional learning across the country. So Jessica, thank you so much for sharing that Learning Forward affiliate perspective and great work that you're doing in Connecticut.
Thank you.
I am now going to turn it over to Nader Twal to bring us home for the panel part of this. Natter is the Program Administrator for Professional Learning and Curriculum Services for the Long Beach Unified School District in California. And I asked Natter to provide a district perspective on the new standards, and there is no one more qualified to do this than he is. In his role in Long Beach, he coordinates interdepartmental efforts to vision, configure, evaluate, and scale a coherent and comprehensive district-wide professional development and talent management system. Emphasis on the word system. He also plays a vital role in supporting a comprehensive equity curriculum and audit, and he coordinates district-wide equity-centered trainings. Natter has also been an invaluable part of Learning Forward's Standard Advisory Committee, and his insights as a district leader have been so valuable as the standards focus on system support and growth. So Natter, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Melinda. That's quite the build-up. I hope to live up to that. As you know, Long Beach Unified is in California, and California loves to adapt what we see happening at the national level and apply to our local context. 1 out of every 8 students in America goes to school in our state. And so we have a very unique context. And so in California, we have the quality professional learning standards, which align with and echo much of what you had seen in the previous set of professional learning standards that came out of Learning Forward. What the state does not do is inhibit us from augmenting using these additional standards. And so for us, they have become a way to really reflect and push ourselves further. Now, the question that we have to always start with, especially at the operational level, right? We're at the district where a lot of this implementation has to happen, is why do we need these standards? Well, with the reauthorization of the different education acts, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the definition of professional development shifted. And there is a very specific criteria that was set where it's sustained. It's not one-off. It's intensive. It's collaborative. It's job embedded, data driven. It's classroom focused. So the what has become very clear. What was not defined for us in the legislation is the how do we do that, and how do we know when we're doing it well? So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what are the indicators that help us as practitioners at the district level and then filter down to the site level to bridge that design and implementation gap? There's a big leap from the what to the how and the how well. And so standards matter. And on the next slide, you'll see why they matter, because they help us to really get discrete about the context in which professional development happens, in the context that advance adult learning, the processes that we know have been tested in our research based to amplify adult learning, and then the content most connected to what the teachers are actually doing in their classrooms in order to actually create student outcomes. So oftentimes, you've heard this in the standards, or if you've read the standards or previewed the standards, on page 10, there's this amazing quote that talks about kind of the theory of change of the standards, which is that they lead to high quality professional learning, which leads to positive changes in educator knowledge, skills, and dispositions, which lead to improvements in educator practice, which in turn leads to accelerated student results. You see at the bottom there one representation of that in the white boxes, which pulls from Dr. Guskey's rich work around how do you evaluate the effectiveness of professional development. At the systems level, and I can imagine at the federal level, when you make investments in this, you want to know what is the return on the investment. And oftentimes where we are really strong at measuring is in that first part. What are participants' reactions to the training? Did you like it? Was it a valuable use of your time? Did it align to what you thought you were going to learn, and did you find it helpful? What we don't oftentimes have the opportunity to do is to measure the participant learning itself. So did you get what I needed you to get out of this training? The standards get very discrete in that area, because you begin to see things, and you heard Paul reference innovation configurations and action guides that begin to define in very role-specific ways what it looks like when I'm actually implementing these things well. And then oftentimes we run straight to the school site and we begin to look at, so what does it look like in the classroom? What are people doing? What are principals doing? And then we assume that that leads just automatically to student outcomes. What the standards offer is what Dr. Guskey sees as kind of a very clear linchpin between the design and the implementation, which is the organizational support and learning. Oftentimes that's the part that's left to interpretation. That's the aspirational part. We assume that if people learn it, then when they go back, they're going to be able to do it. The challenge is when they go back to a context or a classroom or a school site or a district that may or may not be prioritizing what that learning was. The standards give us a third point that we can all agree on and agree to point back to about what is good, what is effective, to bridge that gap between what people experienced in the learning and then what they're expected to do when they go back to their site. And I think this is the most pronounced thing that I think will help us in implementation, especially when you begin to think about equity-centered and practical application. This quote comes from the research done by Dantley and his colleagues in 2008, where he says social justice leadership and reform efforts often remain aspirational because of the gulf between rhetoric and reality. Thus, the noble intentions of social justice are becoming more codified and solidified in the language and imaginations of a lot of educators and educations, but not in social action. What the standards help us to do is to begin to operationalize those aspirations and then begin to show how they're interrelated so that this work is not event-based, it's not training-based, but it becomes a part of how we do our work daily once the training has happened, so that it's not one-off, with the follow-up, with the coaching, with the systemic support, because those roles are defined and the integration is clear. And so when you think at a systems level about the practical applications, what this helps us to do is to really define what is high quality learning. On the front end, we can do a pre-mortem for a massive initiative that we might be rolling out to begin to think about, did we address all the things that we need to address to ensure that this is a high quality experience? Or we could use it as a post-mortem once an event has happened and things have either gone well or not well, to begin to assess what elements we can refine for next time. And then we can begin to align our efforts accordingly. We can also use it to establish, and we have used these documents to establish common language around professional learning. Oftentimes it's left up to people's interpretation and inspiration, but having a third point around which to organize the design, the implementation, and then to assess the impact of professional learning is very helpful. I imagine you all obviously would know that Title II is the primary funding that helps to supplement the core professional development that we do in districts, and we rely on it very heavily to do some of the rich work that we're doing. These standards help to guide that implementation. There are different guides that are provided, you know, the non-regulatory guidance that's offered by the US Department of Ed, but that's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. And so having a discrete set of standards, again, codified at different levels with action guides and innovation configurations that help you to understand what it looks like at various developmental stages of implementation is extremely helpful, especially as we come back from COVID and are beginning to revision education. We have an opportunity right now to rethink how we do things, to rethink how we learn as adults and what that means for student learning. And so in Long Beach, we just finished our federal program monitoring visit, and Title II was one of the areas that was assessed. And we're beginning to think about how could we use the quality professional learning standards and amplify them using the Learning Forward standards to design a needs assessment that we can push out system-wide to understand our current state as we plan how we're going to allocate these funds next year to supplement and enrich the teacher learning to move us across that scale. And so I love the practicality and the aspiration that are represented in the standards, but I also really love how overt they are with the expectation that we're meeting the needs of all learners, especially those who are most marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Natter. What an incredible presentation. And I can tell you that colleagues across the different channels are all cheering you on. So thank you so much. What I would love to do is to turn the slide deck off for a little while so that you all can see all of our panelists. Everybody can join me on the big screen up here. And what we are going to do is just have some question and answer. And if you haven't gathered, this panel is pretty much full of rock stars. And so I have also encouraged them that they don't need to be called on, that they can talk amongst each other as well. But I'm going to start off with a question about awareness. And so, you know, several of you talked about the standards and needing for folks to learn about the new standards, to be aware of them in order to be able to integrate them. So I'm curious, and Paul, I'm going to start with you. how do you buy your colleagues in? And at the Missouri Department of Education, that is at the district level and at the department level, how do you buy them into the importance of the standards?
Well, I mean, I agree. I think policy and practice has to work together. I think that's kind of what I was talking about before. It's really the combination of several things. One is policy has to kind of set in place what's non-invitational. I think funding is important because it says you're putting your money where you think things are important and money needs to be put. And the combination of the two create the expectations. And then I think it's incredibly important that the state agency set the example by saying the things that we think are important in terms of professional learning, and we ask of you, we do ourselves. And so we hold ourselves to the same standard. If we expect districts to gather data and use it to improve, then we should do that too. If we expect professional learning to create better practice, then we should do the exact same thing ourselves. And I think that's how you get, those kind of to work together.
Thank you, Paul. Great. Natter, do you want to mention at the district level?
I do. I was actually going to build on that and say that I think that, we obviously organize around policy, and then we are responsible for the implementation of policy, and then we're held accountable to it. I think, again, the power of these standards is not just that they name what excellence looks like with professional learning so that we know how to design with intent using a research base, but I appreciate all the support that's provided through the action guides and through the innovation configurations. And I want to hone in on the innovation configurations in particular, because they recognize that we're in different developmental levels. Long Beach Unified, one of our hallmarks has always been professional development. We put a high premium on teacher learning. And so the people that are elevated to lead people through professional learning tend to be the all-stars in the classroom who can also lead adults. That may not be everyone's experience in every district because they may not be as big. And so where we're all starting may be different. The innovation configurations help us to understand what has to be in place at the foundational level before I can move on to like full implementation. So it honors the developmental process that's required with adult learning. It's very easy for us to put up here's what it looks like when it's done. But from the practitioner perspective, that can be very deflating when you're looking at your reality in relation to what should be, and you don't have a bridge in between. I don't even know how to get there, although I have all the desire to get there. And so I appreciate the supports that you guys provide that help us to achieve the policy aspiration in very practical and real ways in the field.
Awesome. Maria, one of the questions we hear all the time is about the research, and does professional learning have an impact? And it feels like the standards awareness building is really important amongst the research community as well. Any suggestions from you?
Mm-hmm. Well, as a bridge to the last two comments and just thinking about how to get buy-in, different things will matter for different people. So for sure, the research matters for a large consistency of people, and you need to have the data that shows, yes, professional learning opportunities for teachers do make a difference. And here are some standards that will outline what those look like and what they should look like. Because in the past, the dominant narrative has been that PD takes a lot of money and we're not seeing any return on those dollars. And the research clearly identifies that that is not the case, and that when we look at the standards, there's ways in which professional learning should be organized and implemented and considered as part of a fuller system, that it makes a big difference for teachers and students. So there's the piece of folks that the research and the data are key. And then there's the constituents that need the examples. And that's why it's so nice to see the comprehensive nature of the standards and like the examples that are given of what this actually looks like. I need to see what this looks like because I understand that research says one thing, but what about my context? What about my school, my district, my state? What does this look like? What can this look like? And it gives a vision of what this high quality professional learning looks like. And so I think those two in conjunction are really important when we think about how to gather buy-in and to get folks really aware and tied to what these standards, the power of what these standards can achieve.
Thanks, Maria. And Jessica, the affiliates and you as an affiliate leader are one of the folks that we really charge with building awareness around the standards. What do you suggest?
I think the best thing is that everything that you're offering, the members of your affiliate should be aligned to the standards. So when you're moving forward with speakers, or you're moving forward with resources or activities or networking opportunities, that everything is just connected back to the standards and how it impacts professional learning. So when they come to an affiliate event, they know that the work that they're leaving with and the resources that they're leaving with are grounded in research.
I'm going to ask Paul to help us. We had a question come in through Facebook, and that question is, what might you recommend for a small rural district who wants to do their best for the success of each student? And Paul, I know that districts in Missouri, many are rural, and I would love for you to share some thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's important to note, first off, that Missouri has a lot of rural schools. Basically 2/3 of the school districts in the state of Missouri have less than 1,000 students. So we have plenty of rural school districts in our state. And that's the reason, 3 decades ago, we set up these regional professional development centers. And there's 9 of them across the state, which means they have a collection of school districts that they serve, and a number of them are rural. And they do a lot of work in collaboratives where they bring them together. Sometimes you only have one math teacher, you only have one 5th grade teacher. And so they put them together with other teachers from other schools in their region who are having similar issues. And I think it just takes us back to, what the research tells us, that networking teachers together, following best practice, that's really what helps the most.
Thank you. Thank you, and thanks to our Facebook fan who's asking the question. I'm looking at the clock, and as sad as I am, I know we're coming to the close of this panel. I would love to give each panelist about 20 to 30 seconds to give us a final thought around the standards. Anything you want to share, suggest, cheerlead, what can we pass on and leave everybody with today? And Jessica, I'm going to start with you. Sorry.
I was just thinking, as I was listening to my colleagues today and thinking about all the important and different work that we do, I just think that having something that we can all come back to, that we are grounded in, that we know is research-based, and we know that will impact teacher capacity, which then impacts student achievement, is something that is important and impactful.
Awesome. Thank you. Maria.
I think I would want to do 2 aligned pieces. One, going back to the point of equity that Nader spoke about so eloquently, and thinking about ways in which all teachers are having access to high quality professional learning experiences, so that all students have teachers who are qualified and effective and doing their best in all schools. And the point of really thinking about professional learning as part of a holistic, comprehensive system of teaching and learning in states and districts that include thinking about the alignment between preparation, induction, early career coaching, professional learning, and evaluation is really important to think about holistically the system, and the standards can help with that.
Thanks, Maria. Nader.
Yeah, I'm actually nerding out right now just listening to everyone, because I just made a connection to something that I hadn't made a connection to, which is, again, Long Beach is known for its professional development, but in all the studies that we've read from the McKinsey Group, from international studies around Finland and around, Singapore and all these different places that have made massive advancements in achievement and have education systems that are considered hallmarks of the world, the one thing that they all share in common is that at the center of all their reform effort is an investment in teacher learning across the board. That is what they center their reform on. That is what they believe is the lever of change. And the entire system organizes around it, from the state down to the local level. I don't know that anyone has a tool that unifies all of those together. I think people create layers to help, but to have them braided together in one place, whether or not our state adopts it, is a tool that's accessible to us as members of Learning Forward, and actually as just as the public. And I think that the benefit that that is, and the shared language that that allows us to have nationally, is something that I don't think I've thought about before. And so I'm actually not leaving with a closing comment. I'm leaving with some work ahead.
I love that. Thank you. All right, and Paul Catnik.
Well, I think standards make things happen. And I know with the release of the new standards this week, the first thing we're going to be doing is revising our professional learning guidelines to pull in these new standards and then use those to drive policy, to drive funding, to drive the expectations, and to drive what this state agency is going to do in terms of providing high quality professional learning to educators across the state.
Thanks, Paul. And I will, I'm going to close this out and thank our incredible panel. You guys you're just amazing. I wish we had another hour, but we will call on you again. I also want to thank our audience that's been here. I know that we have some policymakers and some policy staff with us. I heard mention of EIR today. I heard mention of Title II. And I just want to make the important connection that we appreciate your being here and thinking about standards as a way to make sure that your investments in professional learning are really making a difference. And so thank you for being part of our conversation today and for the work that you do in supporting professional learning funding and policy going forward. And with that, I am going to close and remind everybody that at 3 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow and on Friday, we have our final two standards kickoff webinars. Tomorrow is going to focus on the different levels of the system and how standards are used. And on Friday, we're going to dive deep into the research. And we hope that you will all mark your calendars and join us live or come back to our learningforward.org website and review the recordings at your own convenience. So with that, thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.